Well, hello and welcome to chapter 6. This is about learning, and it's an interesting topic, as you can imagine. I think all of them are, but it's really about how we learn things, and it goes into some of our stuff we talked about earlier, learning how to learn. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. So learning is something that takes place, like this young man here learning how to surf. Okay, it's something that involves a thought process, a cognitive process to do something for us as humans, and we decide through steps of learning how to do that. As opposed to the turtle, is this instinctual. They break out of their shells, and they have this instinct of heading to the water. That's not a learned thing, that's more instinct. Let's talk more about that as we go along here. So, instinct and reflexes, these are unlearned behaviors, which means they're not learned. Reflexes are something that really involves quick responses that really don't even go to the brain for a decision many times. They stay at the spinal cord. For example, if you touch something hot, you will remove your hand without thinking, oh, that's hot, I better remove my hand. Your hand will be pulled back, and sometimes even before you realize that it's hot. So sometimes that feeling of pain may come about after you pull it back, and then you feel the burn that occurred. If hopefully it didn't happen, but that just occurs from your hand neurons to your spinal cord and back to your hand neurons. And then later there's a message you can send up to your brain that we just touched something hot and you may want to check and see if it hurts. Okay, that's reflexes. Instincts are things that really, this is the loggerhead turtle heading to the water. It does involve it's a little more complex than some of the simple reflexes, although it's not something we learn how to do necessarily. Bird migration, animal and their sexual activity, and how they mate and things like that is something that really isn't learned, and they are naturally inclined to do those types of things for the survival of the species, basically. So instincts are something that are a little bit higher order, but they are something that doesn't really involve a learning process. Okay, so what is learning? Learning is something that is a permanent change in behavior resulted from something that we experienced in conscious and unconscious processes, and just acquiring skills. And associative learning means that when there is connection between the stimulus and the events that occur. So classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational. These are the three that we'll talk about primarily in this particular chapter. And I think we've covered some of them already, so I'm not going to spend too much time on them. And many of you are aware of some of them, the Pavlov and the Skinner and the Vogeldahl concept. But it really is something that involves when we train our animals. So I'll use that as an example that when we go through this. So classical. This is Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. This was the unconditioned conditioned responses. So what Pavlov did is he hooked up tubes to the dogs' stomachs and was able to measure the amount of saliva that occurred. This is how he did it. Probably couldn't be done today, but it was an interesting study as he did it. What's important to understand is the idea of conditioned, unconditioned responses, and stimuluses and responses. So this is the UCS, UCR. These are things that we want to kind of commit to memory, so to speak. So unconditioned stimulus means that it's just there's food in front of an animal, so unconditionally they will eat it. Okay, it's not a learned process. It's just unconditioned. Okay, it's something that is more of a not a reflex, but more of an instinct. Okay, and then unconditioned response is that they will actually salivate when they see the food. Okay, so we have a food is unconditioned stimulus, salivation is unconditioned response. Okay, so that's kind of the basic that we have here. During conditioning, Pavlov introduced a neutral stimulus. He introduced a bell. The bell had no impact on salivation before the dog heard the bell. And later, what Pavlov did is he paired the bell, neutral, to the food, unconditioned response. And now he has a unconditioned unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. So now the bell is now going to be a conditioned stimulus, okay, which means the bell now will drive salivation without the food. So now the bell will be a conditioned stimulus, which means that it's been changed into something that would create the response. And now the salivation is a conditioned response with no food involved. Okay, so it's a bell and salivation. And this may occur when you have animals that, if you have a pantry door or somewhere where you keep their food, you open the door and they come running. There's no food associated with that, but there is a conditioned stimulus. Opening the door means that there will be hopefully food coming, and they've learned that process. Okay, and so here it is graphically. It kind of makes sense. We'll go through that again. Then the higher order occurs when, for example, there's a can opener for cats. This is when can openers were used to open cat food. Can opener would be the conditioned stimulus based with the food, okay, and then the cat would begin salivating when they heard the can opener, okay, like you're opening now a can of green beans or something. They would salivate and come running, thinking it's food time. Then later they actually assign the let's say the pantry door pair with a can opener, and the cat would salivate with the pantry door, which is 2 steps removed from the food, okay? And the pantry door then would end up being a stimulus response. This is higher order or second order, which means that you're 1 step away from the unconditioned stimulus to the can opener to the door. So you're kind of removed from that a little bit, okay? So acquisition is a time when something, an animal is learning, they're acquiring the skill, to use that terminology. Extinction is when many times if you don't give your dog a treat or something like that, you ask them to sit, and they will kind of stop doing it or do it only periodically. Then you have to go back and give them a treat or so, and they start going back into the response much better. And spontaneous is when it actually comes up out of nowhere. For example, many of you are taking a foreign language, when you took a foreign language in high school, and I took Spanish, and that was a long time ago. But I know now that sometimes things occur, and all of a sudden I remember some of those Spanish phrases. That is what's called spontaneous recovery. Okay, so spontaneously, out of the blue, something triggers it. Could be a smell, could be a sight, could be a sound of a word, and all of a sudden I remember, a phrase or a sentence that we learned in Spanish, a long time ago. So this is kind of the curve: acquisition, extinction, and recovery process. Interesting, probably not hugely important there, but so stimulus discrimination. This is when there's a bell. Okay, now how does a dog differentiate a bell from a buzzer? Okay, so a buzzer goes off, the dog doesn't respond. You ring the bell, dog responds. Okay, so it becomes a discrimination. Generalization is when, for example, let's say you're afraid of a specific spider. That's the example it uses here. And maybe it scares you, and now all of a sudden you're afraid of all spiders, or all snakes, or all dogs, or you get bitten by a dog, and let's say it's a larger, more aggressive dog, and now you're afraid of all dogs. That is a stimulus generalization. So you generalize that stimulus. This is discrimination, which means you make a difference between. And habituation is when learning to respond to stimulus that is presented repeatedly without change. Okay, so this is when it becomes a habit, basically. So you go to study, which means maybe you stop and buy a coffee or something, and every time you stop and buy a coffee, you study. So now your habit is to buy the coffee, and that stimulates your study habits going forward. Probably not the best example, but that's kind of a habit that might come up. Behaviorism is something that was a part of this. So this is all part of this, but behavior, this is observational. Little Albert. This is This is a guy named Watson who did this thing on little Albert, stimulus response reaction. And what he did is he took this little baby. Again, this probably couldn't be done today. Took this little baby and showed him some soft furry things like a rabbit and a kitty cat and things like that. And the baby kind of giggled and laughed and touched. Then he showed him the rabbit or the kitty cat and did this big gong behind the baby. Okay. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Big gong behind the baby, and then the other baby became scared and associated the gong, loud noise, with the soft furry rabbit, okay, or cat. Here's an example. Here is the guy with this kind of a scary mask. Like that would scare me. This is supposed to be Santa Claus, and he scares the baby. And there's a video about it in our resources. But basically, he paired the gong sound with the rabbit and dog, who the baby initially had a positive response to, and now would cry when it showed up. Okay, so that was kind of his work there. Operant conditioning. This is B.F. Skinner. Again, I said OS, so operant conditioning would be a operating system, OS. Just how I said the brain works, but anyway, so these are the terms we're going to talk about right here. Positive means you add something. You're trying to add you add something positive to the situation. Negative, you're taking it away. Reinforcement. Anytime you get reinforcement, it means you're trying to increase a behavior. Punishment means you're trying to decrease behavior. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Okay, it's not punishment. Negative reinforcement means you're trying to increase a behavior by taking something away. So timeout is a good example of negative reinforcement. You're going to go and sit in the corner or sit on that chair or whatever until, for X amount of time, 3 minutes, until you come out and you can play nice. So you're taking something away, ability to play, to try to increase the behavior of nice play. Negative. And then punishment is you're trying to decrease the behavior. Okay, so you actually add something positive or negative to it to decrease the behavior. So you give something positive something to somebody whenever they stop doing a certain behavior. So whenever they stop hitting is the wrong phrase here, but let's say they stop hitting the wall or something like that. If they stop, you give them something positive. If they continue, then they'll end up going to negative and take it away. Positive reinforcement is always better than negative punishment. Okay, it works better as a better trait. Although punishment seems to be quicker along in the short term, but it's actually more difficult in the long run. I hope that wasn't too confusing for you, but those terms are really. This is a very simple definition of them. Positive, you're adding something. Negative, you're taking away. A reinforcement, you're increasing behavior. And punishment, you're decreasing a behavior. Okay. Here's Skinner. Skinner, based on lights and speakers and levers, he trained the rat. The rat learned how to hit a lever, get food. A light would go on. Actually, it would be a sound. Ultimately, then a light. Then it would hit the lever. Then food would come. Initially, it was just a lever. Okay. And so they got more complex as it went along. But this is what's called the Skinner box. And also this grid you see at the bottom, sometimes there was electrical shocks that went through there, not enough to hurt the rat, whatever, but to give it a feeling, a sensation in their feet. Okay. So positive reinforcement, this is something we get from high grades, paychecks, and praise. So as adults, we get our paychecks are a positive reinforcement. We don't perform well, and we don't get a paycheck. Okay. Negative reinforcement is a good example that I think keeps coming up in my way of thinking, is that when you get in a car and you sit down and you start the car, you get a beeping sound until you put your seatbelt on, okay? Or sometimes it's a short period of time or it keeps coming up. But when you put your seatbelt on, the beeping stops. So you're removing something to increase the behavior of putting your seatbelt on, okay? So again, that's, and most of it has sticker charts and those kind of things going on. So positive punishment, we don't really use these terms as they are, but if you wanted to decrease likelihood of behavior, you would give a child a treat every time they have a good, let's say, a good play date or something like that. Negative means that they remove. And here's the timeout of the young man here who didn't play well. Anyway, so shaping. Shaping is when a good example of shaping is when we're trying to teach a dog to roll over. We give them a reinforcement for something that is similar to it. So let's say we want to get the dog to roll over. That's the ultimate goal. We teach them how to sit. Every time they sit, we give them a treat. Sit, give them a treat. Sit, give them a treat. Now they sit. We don't give them a treat. Now we have them lay down. Now they lay down, we give them a treat. Lay down, give them a treat. Okay. Now we say sit, they sit, no treat. We say lay down, they lay down, no treat. Then we have them roll over. Once they roll over, they get a treat. Roll over, get a treat. Okay, so each step along the way, we've done that. Now, teaching math is kind of a way that this has happened for us, and many educators use this to move into some more complex issues. Like the first time you started learning about algebra or something a little more complex than just multiplication or addition or subtraction. You start learning about complex equations. The teacher started by doing something simple, and as you got experience in that, they kept moving it up, the difficulty of shaping. So these are the different reinforcers. So primary are those that are innate. Okay, food, sleep, water, sleep, sex, pleasure, different types. These are things that do not need to be learned. The secondary ones that need to be learned. Okay, this could be something like a bell or something, but a good example is money. Money is it's a piece of metal or a piece of paper, unless it's assigned to something of value. Tokens is another good example. You walk into a gaming arcade and you put money in, you get tokens. Okay, the tokens in and of themselves have no value. Okay, unless you're in the gaming, the video gaming area, and you are able to use those to play games. You walk out of there, and they're actually just a chunk of metal, and it's no big deal. And then you get tickets sometimes. The tickets are of no value themselves until you can turn them in and get that wonderful prize of a pencil with an eraser or whatever we used to get when we were little. Okay, so it's something that really doesn't have any value when you first are approached on it, but it gets value based on where it comes from. Different reinforcement schedules. This is kind of important here because this is how we learn and we train dogs this way. I mentioned it earlier, but continuous reinforcement means every time you do something, you get a reinforcer. Okay. It's an easy way to teach a behavior. It is not necessarily good because if you don't give that reinforcer, they may begin the process of extinction. Okay. Partial reinforcement means that get it every other time, or every time they display something, you maybe give them some praise, but you don't give them a treat. Okay. So that goes together. So partial reinforcement, you're still getting them positive something, but they're not getting exactly what they got before. Now we have a couple of terms that are important to learn here. Fixed means that it is a set amount of time or events that they get it. So every third time a dog sits, they get a treat. Variable means that every so often you give them something. Okay, this is the best way to train something, is that because they really don't know when they're going to get it, so they sit every time. Okay, if you're on this one here and you don't give them one time, they may not sit the next time. Okay, so this is when they learn the word. Interval is on the time between reinforcements. So interval is the amount of time. So every minute you give them something and for staying on task. Okay, this could be studying when you're little or something like that. Ratio is number of responses. Okay, so there's fixed interval, which is a fixed amount of time, or fixed ratio. Okay, there's variable interval, so interval of time changes, and variable ratio. Now this time it's the third time, next time it's the sixth time, next time it's the second time. Okay, so those are the four terms, and they're combined in this way. Okay, variable ratio is the most effective way for long-term learning, and this is what's used in gambling. If you've ever had the opportunity to use like slot machines or something like that, they have algorithms or programs in them that have a reinforcement that is based on variable ratio. So if they were fixed interval, then every third time, so you would bet, let's say one coin every third time. Now you bet 5 coins, and you get the reward. Then you go 1 coin, 5 coins, you get the reward. Okay. Variable ratio means that you don't know when it's coming. You don't know when it's coming, so you may go 5, 5, 1, and you get the reward. And you go, oh man, that's terrible. Then you go 5, 5, 5. Oh, that was the reward. Now you do 5 again, and you get the reward. Okay, so the variable is the best way to go about doing it if you want to teach something, and that's how gambling is set up for us. Okay, and here's the variable ratio. Here's a graph here, and it talks about it a little bit here. Okay, so gambling in the brain. This is about gambling and how it comes about. And gambling, not necessarily when you're talking about cards, that's a little bit different. There's a little more of a cognitive process involved with cards. But in games like this, video poker, slot machines, some other things like that. Those big wheels we spin. If you've ever been to Las Vegas or Atlantic City or something like that, you'll see those. Okay, or some of the games that we have that are video games that we have spinning wheels on. So here's cognitive, like learning cognitive map. Okay, this is like you drive to work, you drive to school. You don't have to think about it anymore. You create this mental picture of the layout in an environment, and you go about doing that without even having to really think about it very much. You have a cognitive map in your head. You can drive from home to school, home to work, and you don't even realize what happened along the way, and yet your body continues to respond in appropriate ways. And you're focused on your driving, but you're really not focused on your driving. Okay, sometimes it can happen, you go too much into it, and that's when accidents occur. But many times you just are able to go through the process as though it's rote memory. I think it's something else we use too on that. This is late learning. This is something that you watch, usually observational, or it can be auditory. So you hear, let's say, profanity from your parents, okay, or from older adults around you, or maybe use it yourself and whatever. But you're hearing it from somebody, but you're not really using it until all of a sudden you get to a point where you start using it. A good example on this, smoking, for example, is one. Maybe drinking might be another one. That you don't even think about it. And the first drink you take, or the first cup of coffee you drink, it really doesn't taste very good, especially if you go into wines at all. Your first taste of red wine is like, why in the world would anybody drink this stuff? And after a while, you become a connoisseur. Okay, so those are things that happen. But so a child may learn about watching his parents. They didn't really do it, but and then they drive themselves. They probably going to take the same route or very similar route. Okay, unless they have a purpose for taking a different route. Here's the cognitive maps. These are rats with food, and rats will find their way through that as they go first. So that's cognitive maps. Observational learning. Here is the spider monkey learning how to drink. Okay, they say that observational learning. If you have parents that drink a lot, based on observational learning, you are probably going to drink. Okay, now whether you do a lot or not, that might make a different story. Okay, so you have so your parents are telling you you're going to a party. You say your first party, kind of, let's say younger-ish, early high school or something like that, and your parents say they even drop you off, or you go with friends or something like that. Okay, no drinking, no drinking, no drinking, no drinking, no drinking and driving. Okay. Then you watch your parents drink all the time. You watch your parents go out to a restaurant, have a few drinks, and then drive home. And you watch them do this, but you've never really thought much about it. Now you're at the party and someone offers you a drink. Okay. You are probably going to take the drink. Okay. Number one, because your it is going to tell you that they'll never find out. Okay. But also you are going to do it because that's what you've learned through modeling. Observational learning is one of the strongest forms of learning. When people say, do as I say, not as I do, it's really hogwash, because we tend to do what people show us, okay, more than what they say. So parents that say that are either smokers or drinkers or fast drivers or don't speed like I'm doing right now. We're late, so I'm going to speed, but don't do that. What are you going to do when you're late? You're going to speed, okay? So it is one of the strongest forms of learning, and it would be called observational learning. There's other forms of observational learning here, with exercises, or even Khan Academy. Well, a lot of people are involved in the online learning, especially the younger students. There are classes in high school that are in science classes that are doing experiments based on watching someone do an experiment, and it's just that isn't necessarily the best way to do that. Sometimes a kinesthetic learner needs to do it themselves, but anyway, so their learning can take place, and this is an exercise class, okay? Social learning theory. So Bandura said, in order for us to learn something, we've got to have attention to it. We've got to pay attention to it. We've got to watch. You want to watch mom and dad drink coffee. When I was younger, my mom and dad would always drink coffee, and I always thought it was really cool. Okay, I got my first cup of coffee, and it's like, ugh. And then I put so much sugar and creamer in it that it tasted more like a soda. And now you can buy that at Starbucks. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But I had to watch that. Then I had to remember that thing about coffee. And all the adults were having coffee, so I wanted to be grown up, but I'm only 8, okay? So, but eventually I was able to have coffee and I reproduced their behavior, okay? But there also has to be a motivation to it. I want to be an adult, okay? So I had attention to it. I watched them do it. I remembered them doing it. I wanted to reproduce it, okay? And I wanted to then be grown up. So I had all these things going on, and that led me to drink coffee as a younger person. So vicarious reinforcement is when you watch somebody do something good, and they get a positive reinforcement. Then you learn that positive reinforcement, you learn that behavior vicariously through watching them. Okay, you watch something do something good, they get reinforced. And then now I want to get reinforced. I want to do something good too. Okay, doesn't require you to have to do it. Vicarious punishment means you watch something do something, like you watch an older brother or sister get punished for, being out late or something like that. I don't want to get that punishment, so I'll do that. That may be a bad example, but maybe hitting someone or stealing from someone or lying or something like that. And you watch the punishment and you learn the behavior by watching somebody else be punished for it. Okay, so those are theirs. Here's a Bandura. There's a nice video about it online, but it's where kids learn an aggressive behavior watching an adult here. No, it's not the dress, right? This is a 1950s, I think, the film. Anyway, so little kids learn it by watching the adult do it, and that becomes that was a big issue back in those days of modeling and of observational learning. Here's kind of the end of it right here. So many, and I've mentioned this before, I think that video games don't make us violent. Okay, so people that say so-and-so watched a video game and went to and shot up at school, not necessarily the case. Okay, there is a correlation versus causation, right? Correlation between video games and aggressive behavior. Okay, aggressive behavior is somebody being angry, is somebody maybe yelling, is somebody just being rude, or slamming in this case you can see the gun there, the video machine, maybe slamming it down or whatever. Violence is when they would go and say that little kid shot the person and then turned to his friend and just beat the crap out of him. I mean, that certainly not an image we want to get in there, but that would be a violent action. Okay, so what creates violence in people, usually there are so many more other issues that involve violence rather than just aggression. Okay, so driving in the car videos, okay, where there's crazy driving and all that going on, you may go out and drive a little more crazy because you might think all of a sudden pretend you're in the video. I know people do that all the time, even though they may not admit it. They take a corner fast because such and such a video did that. But it doesn't mean you're going to go out and ram your car into a group of people to kill people. Okay, that's a violent action. Okay, So when parents say that video games cause violence, no. Video games can, there's a correlation between aggression in video games, but not between violence in video games. Maybe a correlation, but not causation. Okay? It requires several other elements to be involved. Okay? So that's chapter 6. And I will post this up, and we will move on to chapter 7 in the next video. Thank you.